Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Good evening, mate.
Hi there, you alright?
Yes, I'm very well, Brian, and welcome all to a chapter of my life with one of the two kings of Birmingham in the 70s, Mr. Browne Little. How's things?
Pretty good, to be honest. Yeah. Had a good day, nice and busy at home, so it's been alright, yeah. Pretty good. My wife's out at the gym, I would imagine.
Yeah, mine's at Zumba.
Yeah, she spends most of her life there, but after school, after working hours, so she works at school, but she's very busy, and I've been really busy with the books today, so it's been a good day, yeah.
Fantastic. And how's that right arm? Because I've seen you signing so many books. My Aston Villa is the title, and we're going to be talking about your Aston Villa career. And it's not just your career, Brian, it's your life and times associated with one of the founder members of the Football League, Aston Villa, isn't it?
Yeah, it is generally more about the club than myself. I mean, obviously I feature in it because of the opinions on being a fan when I've been a fan, when I've not been working there. Being a youth team player, being a youth team coach, working in the club shop, being an informal advisor. Obviously, I'm polite enough to make sure that those things are right and proper, how they're put in the book and proper. But yeah, it's been quite enjoyable going back through the whole stage of it all, with my good friend Peter White, who I know as Pedro Blanco. I've always called him Pedro Blanco for the last 25 years. And it's been great fun, and we've really revitalised each other in many ways. The lockdown was pretty dim and dreary for us, and we were talking one day prior to last Christmas, and we said, we're just talking about, things to do, and I said, well, I've always wanted to do a book about it. And he went, January, we'll do it, sort of thing. And I said, yeah, well, we'll try it, but if it gets boring and we don't think it's very good, we'll just put it off. And he went, yeah, but 5 months later, we'd written a book, and I can't believe it's out so early as it is. But it's really, I've enjoyed reading through it and checking it out with Pedro, and I think the fact that we know each other that well, we talk all the time to each other when we've been on all sorts of FaceTime calls. Took our time over things. If we weren't sure about something that we were talking about, we just did a little check-up to make sure we tried to get the stats right, because quite often, at my age, you talk about something and you say, was it really that, or was it something else? So it's been a fascinating sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 months now, and both Pedro and myself are really, really delighted with the way the book looks and the content inside of it.
Where did the friendship begin with Pedro Blanco, and how come Pedro Blanco, not Peter White?
Well, the Pedro Blanco thing was very simple. We wrote a 2-year diary about Aston Villa, the return of the little villain, when I in the 90s, mid-90s, 96 it probably was. And to write that book, we both went on holiday together for 2 weeks. And I have to say, he sacrificed his holiday because we'd talk all morning and into the afternoon, and then I would go and lie in the sun for the rest of the day while he wrote everything that we'd talked about on a tape, as it was, or a recorder in those days. And we came away from a 2-week and a bit holiday with a 2-year diary on Aston Villa, and during that period, Peter White became Pedro Blanco because we were in Mallorca, of course, speaking Spanish to each other. So that's the Pedro Blanco part. Our friendship would go back to the 70s, mid-70s, probably late the 70s, when he was part of the Birmingham Mail Sports Argus thing. And in those days, you'd always have a drink with the press lads. We didn't have agents and things like that. And sometimes, it used to be a player would talk to a press man if he was a little bit unhappy, and the press man said, "Oh, I'll put that out," and you might get some interest from people. It's a different. It was there was the same sort of a similar sort of way of things going on, but the press man was generally speaking the liaison, a la the agent, so to speak. And we always became big friends with them. After games, socialising with them was good. They often travelled on the team bus. They flew onto away games in Europe with us. So we were very, very close with each other. And Peter and I and many others, got on really well. I mean, I can't really remember those days where you fell out with a press man. You all got on really well. And if something went on that wasn't appropriate, sometimes it just got swept under the carpet, and everybody would say, "Oh, glad that didn't come out," sort of. So it was a completely different era. And I'm fully aware of how things have to be done these days, and we all are right and proper with that. But going back to early apprenticeship and professional start, the press people were part of the team. Really, it was a show where the manager used the press, the chairman used the press, the players used the press. There was no such thing as a go-between agent in those days, and it just made for a happy. And I have to say, it was a different era. It was so far less professional then than it is today. We were all professional footballers, but socialising was part of the ethos of being a football player. And it was encouraged by the team, it was encouraged by the manager, it was encouraged by the chairman, it was encouraged by the fans, because they loved sitting in the pub having a drink with the players, and that's how it was in those days.
Absolutely, and it's a shame that we couldn't return to those halcyon days of the 70s.
No, I think it has had to move on, and it's far more of a spectacle now in terms of the media side of things. So it has moved on in that respect. But I wouldn't swap my eras for anything in the world. We had a fantastic time, and I've been very lucky to still be in it. So I guess some of the lads from the 70s might disagree with me, but that's just the way things work out for different people, I guess.
Now, your love affair with Aston Villa started as a 15-year-old boy when you come up to sign apprenticeship forms with Villa, and a couple of years after signed pro forms. And you were in and around the first team dressing room. And I know we've done previous podcasts, Browne, but your visions and your memories of that dressing room at Aston Villa always cracks me up. There's some wonderful stories. So firstly, talk to me about those days of you being a kid around that dressing room.
Well, it was quite terrifying, really, because it was a pretty hostile place, in all fairness. There was anything up to 40 professionals in those days. And, they were very demanding. And when you were an apprentice, you were an apprentice. You were there to clean boots, pick their kit up, make a cup of tea for them, run the bath for them, wipe up and clean up after wherever they'd done. And it was really harsh. It was a tough period in life. I seemed to come through it okay, but I've seen a lot of lads who didn't enjoy it, and I was happily I very happily sort of volunteered to make tea for the first team players, because I had this even at that age, at 15, I remember I used to have these, and I've probably said it to you before, I used to have this in my mind: look, listen and learn. I used to say to myself all the time. I didn't have to say anything, but everything that was going on, I was looking at it, I was listening to it, I was learning from it. There was things that were good, there were things that was bad, in my opinion, but that's only my opinion. But there was, it was very hostile, because only 11 players could play in the team. As I've said, there were anything up to 40 professionals. So every Friday at 1:00, the team sheets would go up, and, players who wanted to be in the first team, who weren't in the first team, were throwing their boots around the dressing room, stamping up and down, shouting at each other, swearing about the manager and all sorts of things. It was a really unbelievable environment. And added to that, my first season as a 15-year-old, the club got relegated to the third division for the first time in their history. So it was a real eye-opener for a 15-year-old boy to be in a dressing room of men, hearing words that I hadn't really heard before. In all fairness, it was very hostile. But at the same time, I was learning an awful lot. You could sense where the goodness was and sense where the sort of more guilty type of player would be. I happily earmarked Bruce Rioch, Jeff Bowden, George Curtis, Ray Graydon, all these type of players who would stick in my mind as being, the good guys. And then you'd have the naughty boys, who would cut people's socks up and all sorts of things, and then and hide behind a newspaper while the sort of senior pro they've neutralised his socks would look around trying to find out who's done them and was running around wanting to hit somebody. It was really crazy. It was really and training was very tough in those days as well because of the fact that there was only 11 playing on a Saturday. Most Thursdays we'd have like a practice match, and it was like World War III. It's like, wow. People were kicking lumps out of each other. Friday morning we used to train on the car park with 40 professionals, and often the apprentices had to join in as well. So it was like what you call killer balls, where they bang each other against the wall and all sorts of things. So it was a completely hostile environment, completely different to today. That's why I say today's football is far better. People are trained properly. There are sports scientists who can tell them what to do, what not to do. Their body's in great shape. They know what to eat, not what to eat. So I'm a fully fledged, having been involved for 50 years, I'm a fully fledged advocate of today's football is a million times better. Yes, the old-fashioned ways were great, and people got stuck in and had a bit of a fight every now and again, and the crowd could get really into it. It was a fantastic environment to be in. The crowds were really still the same. But it was. At times, I look back and think it was barbaric, and that's what I thought about it. And I always used to say then, God, if I was ever in charge, not that I was thinking I was ever going to be charged, I wouldn't do that. I certainly wouldn't do that. But I'd do that because I've seen Bruce Rioch do that. And he's a good guy. I can see that. So I learned so much in a very short period of time. And it helped me grow up. It helped me grow up with good principles. And I thank that. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that I was strong enough to come through that as well, because if you put too many sugars in somebody's tea, they'd just throw it all over the floor in front of you, just because it was the thing they did in those days. But if you did that today, people would be saying, that's not right. You can't do that to a kid. You can't upset them like that, and rightly so. But for me, in that era, because it was like that, you got on with it. You gritted your teeth. You looked at it, and you somehow came through that situation. Some boys didn't, in all fairness. Some boys, just sort of melted, and I remember that. That's why I was very anti, all sorts of initiation things and things like that. I always thought it was a little bit, it was not right. Singing songs fine, but just making somebody look silly or making them feel silly or making them feel small. I hated all those things. So I learned, and I had my own set of principles very quickly. In fact, when I went home, after 3 or 4 months of apprenticeship, my mum and dad said, "My word, Brian, you've changed." I remember, them thinking, "Wow, you're growing up." And I was growing up very quickly. So it was brilliant, but at the same time, it was wrong. And I learned a lot from the wrongs. But within the wrongs, there were many good guys as well. There's a lot of good guys in there.
And you had the singers and the smokers as well in the dressing room, didn't you?
I used to love that. I mean, Barry Hall, bless him, he's passed now, Barry, but Barry would have 2 cigarettes at half time, and he'd light the second one with the end of his stub of his first cigarette. And then most of the lads smoked then in them days. Most of the lads would sit down with their legs crossed with a cup of tea and a cigarette, and even before the game, because you couldn't go out on the pitch. You weren't allowed to warm up on the pitch before the games. You only went out when the referee's whistle went. As I say, I love watching warm-ups today for games for players, because, you think, crikey, at 20-3, we were still in the players' room watching the horse race and the 240 race before we went into the dressing room for 3 o'clock. It's just a different world. So, and I like to think some of all of that will come out in this book, the different, and then the change of the way the managers looked at things, and the change of the way that players did things, and the different players as it progressed and as it moved on, and the different eras. So, I think that's. I'm not saying it's like it's a homage to that, because it's just a story about the whole 50-year thing. But if you're deep enough to look into it, you would understand that those sort of things are being pointed out, I think.
Absolutely. And another differential from today to yesterday was the reserve games. Villa played in the Central League,
Yes.
and on your first game, you went up to Old Trafford, and Paddy Crellan marked you, didn't he, and give you a bit of a chase?
I did. He did, because, my coach said to me at 15, I was a midfield player for the first few months of my career before I was moved to a forward. And he said to me, we'd done pre-season training where I'd ran quite well. I'd never ran so far in my life, in all fairness. I mean, it was hard as hell, to be honest. But he'd said to me, you're playing against Paddy Crellan today. He's been injured, so he's out of the first team, but he's come back. Listen, son, you can run him into the ground. Don't you worry about it. He can't run anymore. Well, they carried me off after 65 minutes. I mean, I couldn't get near him. Yeah. I mean, and for whatever lack of pace he had, for whatever reason, every time I looked to find him, he was 10 yards the other side of me. He disappeared, and he was passing the ball out to somebody else. And thankfully, years and years on, I met Paddy a few times, and I said, you won't remember this, but I played against you when I was 15 years old, and you absolutely exhausted me. This is what my coach said to me. He just laughed at me. He just laughed. And we've always laughed at each other all the years on. Whenever I've seen him, he's always laughed at me. He said, all right, Brian? I said, yeah, I'm all right, Paddy. Thanks a lot, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Because and that was the other side of football. In those days, it wasn't all about being athletic and a great mover and everything. You could get away with your brain and a lot of other players. And I certainly learned a lot of him that day, because he dropped his shoulder one way and I'd gone, and then he'd just gone trickling over 10 yards to the other side and passed the ball away. So it was a great exercise and a great learning curve for me as a 15-year-old boy to play at Old Trafford against a legend at that time, a great player. So, that was the other thing, because we were, thrown in at the deep end very, very early, which is not the way it is today. You tend to go through the grades. I mean, yeah, we have 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds, but it's further and farther between than it ever was in the olden days. We played, a lot of senior players, and I played a lot of senior players before I was 16-year-old. So, I was learning very quickly that way, and it certainly suited me anyway.
And the best education that you can get actually doing it, going and playing against those senior pros that you learn so much off.
Yeah, in those days, it was definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the academy system has changed completely.
Yes,
and the academy system is now still producing really quality players, because if you look at youth level, England, especially so, are doing well at all levels, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21s. They've done really well over the last few years. So, it's a different way of doing things. I came through the era where it was a lot harsher, a lot more competitive, and you have to do things in a different way. So I certainly won't criticise the modern way, but I personally, came through the old way, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
And you also came through that wonderful youth academy, although in those days they wasn't known as academies, or perhaps West Ham United was. For everybody else, it was just the youth team. And you got to the final of the Youth Cup and won it 5-2 on aggregate against Liverpool. But you come through a tough game against Birmingham City, where in the two games at Villa Park and St Andrews, almost 40,000 fans went to watch you shape up against Trevor Francis, the two kings of Birmingham.
Yeah, I mean, I think that era with Trevor and myself was fantastic. I mean, because of the media side of things, and there's no social media or anything like that at all. Just to think, even at that age, at 17, we both had like a full page picture of the pair of us on the newspapers and everything. It was just brilliant, because that didn't happen in those days. But that particular game just caused so much interest, because there was a lot of players in both teams. Yeah, a lot of lads from the Blues team went on to play a lot of first team games, and certainly a lot of lads from our team went on to play a lot of games. Some not so many for Villa, but had good careers. So there were two really talented sides, and Trevor and I were always sort of judged against each other, and we used to have a lot of times talking about it as well when we were younger. When we went away with the England youth team together, it was great being alongside him. Although he was always in the team in front of me, which sort of didn't nerve me a little bit, I guess, But then I got to the England first team, the national side, one game before him as well. So I got a little bit of an own back sort of thing, but not too much because obviously I got injured and he went on to get many, many caps. But going back to the youth game, yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic spectacle. Either one of those teams could have won the Youth Cup. I mean, it was that close between us. We went on to win it after beating Blues. But I have to say, I think they could well have done that if had they beaten us on over the two games. So it was that close. There were some good players in their team as well.
And Tomo played for Liverpool, didn't he?
Yeah, Phil Thompson played in the final. Not a lot of them went on in the first team, but a lot of them had careers in football, which was the way. But Tomo, I mean, I got to know him well the year after, or that particular end of that season when we all went off to play in the England youth team in the international tournament in Spain, which we won, which was again a great achievement. To be with Phil Thompson, Kevin Beattie, who was a great player. My word, he could play. Yeah, he was some player, Kevin Beattie. Wow. And obviously, John Gidman was in that. I mean, there were some good players, and we won that competition, international youth competition in 1972 in Spain. So, I remember then, the world was beginning to change for me. I mean, it's I think my performances were watched in the Youth Cup final itself against Liverpool, and that's what got me into the youth team itself. There were players ahead of me, players who didn't do so well. I'd call Stevie Camp, who was playing for Sheffield United's first team at the time, kept me out of the side. I think Steve went off to play abroad somewhere, probably America, I think it might well have been. But not a lot of people would have heard of him, but he kept me out of the team. But I scraped into the England team at the end because of the Youth Cup final, I think, more than anything else. It was a fascinating period. I remember sitting with Trevor, after in Spain one day, and he said to me, "Have you got a car?" And I said, "No, I haven't passed my test yet." He said, "Oh, I've just bought a Triumph TR6," and I was so jealous. I was like, "What? A Triumph TR6? Wow!" It was brilliant. For us, it was like, and John Gidman was there, and Giddy was thinking, I've got a Cortina, so I'm gonna. So he was thinking, I'm gonna have a car like that before long. But just little things that were inspirational to you at that time, to want to be the same as and to want to do as well as. There was always a carrot ahead of you, whereas today a lot of things are given to the younger players today, and that's the way of it. But in our day, I think I was still earning sort of £18 a week when I played for England youth team and the Villa first team, so it wasn't a lot. I couldn't have bought a car with it, that's for sure.
But going back to that Birmingham City versus Aston Villa youth game, I remember it was in the papers. It was the talk of Birmingham. I've never known anything like that since. And I remember in our school, I think we'd have been in infants in those days, and it was all around our playground. It was, you were either Brian Little or you were Trevor Francis. Anyone that played football, there was only two players in Birmingham that you were, either Blues, either Villa.
Yeah, we got a tremendous amount of spotlight at the time. And our youth team, as it went on and progressed, certainly got a lot of headlines as well. I mean, Gidman was an exceptional player. People like Bobby McDonnell, went on to play for Man City and things like that. Bobby was a really good player. The 75 League Cup final as a midfield player. So they were good players, man. And a lot of our lads went on and had good careers, even if it wasn't in England. Dougie George went off to Holland and played in Dutch football. And they stayed in America all his life, as Dougie stayed in Holland. So they've had great careers elsewhere, but probably myself and John Gidman were the two from our team that really stayed on at Villa and went. But Trevor and myself in those days it was brilliant for us, because we didn't have a rivalry between me and him. In fact, we got on really well. But it was great for the fact to be able to, I don't think there's been that type of rivalry before where a player from each team has been sort of judged against each other so much, whereas we genuinely were, sort of thing, as you've said, and you point that out as a younger person, that you'd rather me or him if you were a Birmingham person, sort of thing. So it's quite interesting and still fascinating to hear that was the case, sort of thing.
And we would always sing it in school, Browne Little Walks on Water, or it was Trevor Francis that walks on water.
Yeah.
And that there hasn't been two other iconic players growing up at the same time.
At the same time, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the two big sides, the two only sides in Birmingham, to be fair, Albion would suggest that they are a Birmingham team. But I've always thought that the Baggies are a black country team. Do you remember the game in 1972 at Villa Park where England played Scotland, a youth game?
Yes.
Bobby played.
I remember it briefly.
Yeah,
yes.
And you played. That was my first ever introduction and game, watching a live game of football. That was at Villa Park.
Yeah, and it's not an official game, is it not? I mean, it's not gone down in records and that now. I mean, I tried to check that out a little while back, and it's not been recorded as such, So it was a game that was fixed up quickly between the two nations before the international tournament in Spain. So it was like a prep game rather than an international. It was a friendly game at best, but I remember it, and I remember we lost 1-0. Scotland beat us 1-0, but we actually went on to win the whole of the European Championship thing, as it was in that day. But I remember the game very briefly because it wasn't like blown out to be something special. In fact, as I've said, I think you would find it very difficult to find. I've got a few cuttings from the game from the local papers, but if you look on the England itself, on the England sort of looking through all the records, it isn't recorded as a proper international game, to be honest. So that was a little bit disappointing that I didn't have that put down. But I didn't get a cap of that at all. So I look back and think, oh, that's a bit disappointing. But it was still a great occasion. It was still lovely to play for, and I still, as I said, I had a few memories and mementos from that particular game.
And 72 was the year of Pele as well. He come to Villa Park, didn't he? He played Santos in 72.
Oh, yes, yeah. And that was a completely different experience because the game was to be played under floodlights. The floodlights failed, so they had to get a generator in to and I remember it saying, I can't remember what the price was. It was a few £1,000s to get the generator, and it made such a big story that Aston Villa had spent a few £1,000s on even getting a generator to put the lights on and things like that. But a few of the lads were lucky enough to be in Pele's in his company. I wasn't, unfortunately. I wasn't deemed to be working that night. I mean, there was a roster for who was doing games, and a couple of the young lads got into the dressing room and even got to speak to Pele or sit next to him. I had photographs taken with him. I never got that chance, unfortunately. But yes, it was a great game to see. We had some really good games at Villa Park because we had semi-finals there quite often, and certainly in my apprenticeship days we had semi-final games there. It was an iconic place to be. It was held as being one of those neutral stadiums for semi-final games. Watched quite a few different sort of sides playing there from time to time as well.
One of the great venues in English football, and you're right, I think there's probably been between 40 and 50 semi-finals at Villa Park through the years. Another game in the 70s, bit of a nightmare game, and another game that was arranged as a friendly. Rangers come to town against Villa. What was your memories of that? Pretty scary, I'd say.
It was scary, in fairness. There's lots of things going on outside the ground. There's lots of sort of rumours coming to us that there'd been a little bit of trouble on the way to the ground. I think it was a friendly game, but the Scottish lads just landed themselves in the hold end and just basically sort of took over the place, really. They were obviously a little bit worse the way for alcohol. Within about 20 minutes, I don't think it was about 20 minutes into the game, they invaded the pitch because we were winning 2-0, and it was really, really quite scary. People were running around all over the place. There was lots of police there. We were getting guided up the tunnel. And, of course, John Burridge, who was as daft as a brush, as we all know, left his gloves in the goal at the hold end, and he went back out to get his gloves. Everybody was going, "Where are you going, Budgie? I'm going to get my gloves." And everybody's thinking, "No, don't do it." But it wasn't. I mean, he just went out and did it. So that was a bit of a funny part to it, but it was really nasty. And every now and again, we were standing in the tunnel, because we had the stairs up to the tunnel, in old stairs in those days. And it was very narrow, and every now and again the policemen were bringing a fan out who was fighting like crazy and was coming up the tunnel, and we were waiting there to see if we would go back onto the pitch, but it just never happened. We just couldn't get back out to play again, and a friendly game was abandoned, which was quite bizarre, really.
It was quite incredible, but again, Scotland, when they come down to England, they do bring a fair amount of supporters, and sometimes it can get leery.
Well, wasn't there?
Yeah.
There was a sort of fighting culture at that time, which was, not healthy for the game. So, again, it's good to see the game having moved on from that. But yeah, that really was a difficult day, and one that it was strange. It's hard to enjoy it. We didn't enjoy it a bit, but we were 2-0 up and match abandoned, which is pretty disappointing for the fans, I guess.
And there was a bit of a fighting spirit with you and Ron Saunders. You didn't see eye to eye. You were the rebel. He was the disciplinarian. I suppose it didn't get off to a good start when he just asked, "Who are you?" when you walked in on your first meeting. And then when you tried to nutmeg the goalkeeper, it didn't really cause any favour with Ron, did it?
There have been a few times. I mean, I think I like to think now, as I've grown up and eldered somewhat, I'd like to think a lot of it was almost an act on his behalf. Yeah. He knew how to wind me up, and he knew that winding me up actually made me play better in many ways, I think. But at the time, he wasn't overly kind to me at times. But that was his way, and I've learned that years on, because I look back and there was people like myself, Tony Morley, Gary Shaw, who were, it's hard to think of the right word, but we were more
type of players.
More the players we needed to give the ball to, and yet then he'd have these other players in the team who he knew he knew what they would do, and he liked them lads, and he was a little bit kinder to them. He still wouldn't do them a favour, believe you me. I mean, he wouldn't. He would never let anybody get away with something. If someone asked for a day off because of something, it just didn't happen. I can't think of anything that he would let go, sort of thing. So I think his principle was, if I do a favour for somebody, I'm going to end up doing it for everybody. So he was. But with me especially, so he really took me to town and tested me an awful lot. Excuse me. Sometimes I've been injured, and I remember, young Gary Shelton had got in the team. He called me in and said, "Oh, he's a better player than you now. So you won't be playing for this team for a long time." And then I can't remember, Chelsea didn't have the best of games. He was in for a couple of games, didn't have the best of games against one of the sides. And he called me and said, "Right, you're playing Saturday." And I went, "What? You've just told me I'm not playing anymore. You've told me Gary Shelton's much better than me." And Shelton's a great lad, believe me. And no disrespect to him at all, because he was a lovely lad and a really good player. Went on to have a decent career. But he just used players' names, and he used to think that I would go out as I did and say, "Oh, he's just told me you're a better player than me." And we were open with each other because he did that. But he was the same with Shelts. I mean, right, you're coming out of the team now because Brian Hunt's going back, sort of thing. So there was lots of players who got the harder side of it, and I was one. And if he'd say to me some days, "Well, you might have to leave," and I'd say, "Yeah, that's fine, I'll go." He'd call me in the next day and say, "Right, Grimsby want you." And I'd say, "Well, but they're bottom Division 3. He said, "Yeah, but they're interested in you." And then he'd say, "But you're playing tomorrow." And I'd go out like fuming, but thinking, "Right, I'll show him. I'll have a bit of this." And so there was so many little things that he did that I just think years on, it was his way of getting the best out of me. But did I realise it at the time? No, not one little bit. So we did fall out quite a bit, so it's, excuse me, I was a little hot-headed in the time, and, I needed to calm down, and I don't think I did too often, to be honest.
Saunders was a genius. For what he done, the way he managed that team and the way he assembled two sides, because, okay, the Villa team that went on and won the European Cup in won the League 81 Cup in 82, in many schools of thought, people would say that the team in 76, 77 probably technically was a better side than the team that won it in 82. You were both great teams and both very similar teams, but different personnel. Some similar, but different as well.
He built different teams. He built probably 3 different teams at least in his period there. And yet each of the players had a similar format to each other. You could compare. Although Cropley wasn't as good a passer of ball as Gordon Cowans, he was the same the same beautiful left bond of a left foot. Carradus and Des Bremner. You could put them in the same boat. Mortimer as captain, you would always be in between them. Was brilliant. Gary, Keith Leonard and myself, Andy Gray and myself. You put Peter With and Gary Shaw in the same sort of categories. A winger who could score goals. You have Ray Grade and Tony Morley. There are so many similarities. About 2 really strong centre forwards. We had Chris Nicol, Ian Ross, who were really dependable, Alan Evans and Ken McNaught. Fullbacks who were just completely reliable. You look at the fullbacks matched each other up all the time. And he was, he was an master at that. But I must say, Tony Martin had to have a bit of praise for this as well, as his chief scout and highly recommended players to Ron. But he would have had the DNA of a player off Ron, what he was looking for, what type of player he should be, what his strengths and weaknesses were. And he built 2 teams that the names were different, but the actual strengths of those and weaknesses of those players were identical, absolutely identical. He built that sort of a side, which helped me later on in my managerial career try and recreate a Ron type team, which often helped me have success at clubs. But his teams were unbelievably well drilled, unbelievably fit. We never got a day off with Ron Saunders. We used to get a day off. A day off was right. You're in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you'll be gone at 9:45. And it was 45 minutes of hell. You know what I mean? And it was always on a Wednesday or a Thursday, because he would make sure that we couldn't go out the night before. Because I think when he first came to the club, the culture where we were encouraged to have team nights out, and you needed the next day off to get over it, sort of thing. Well, the minute he came in the club, he went, right, you're not out together anymore. You can go together, but I'm not having a big group of you going out together. And if you do, you will find out why you're not going to do it. Because next morning, I've seen it at the start, half a dozen lads will have come in, haven't been out all night, and they'd wished they hadn't after 15 minutes. It was hell. So he taught us that way. He was hard in that respect. And he changed the discipline of the club. He certainly was aware of people who had a drink. Tony Morley will tell you the story. He always come right up to you close, just to smell you, just to see if there was alcohol smell on your breath or anything like that. So he was just, because that was a thing of the era, that was team spirit and team bonding of that. So he was, in many ways, ahead of himself. He didn't think that was good for you, so he was really going to stamp it out, and he did do. But when you'd won a game on a Saturday, he'd happily walk down the bus and give you a beer, and he can give you a cigar. He often handed cigars out. So there was a time that he would say, right, here's a little bit of celebration, but he would never let that affect his preparation for games. His preparation was the same routine day in and day out throughout the week, till you were organised and knew exactly what he wanted. And that's only something that I've sort of learned years on. That's why he was doing it, and that's why he didn't mind not being liked by people, because he knew it worked, and he knew some people, if you let them off a little bit, he knew they would probably let the team down. So he was an incredible man, and as I said, I didn't really get on with him very well, but I have the utmost respect for him, the highest respect, in fact, I would say.
I loved when you recall the time when you met Ron many years after to apologise.
Yeah. I did. It was like a League Cup winning to at Villa Park, and Alan Evans. I wasn't invited. I mean, Alan Evans said Alan's wife Gillian wasn't going. He said, "You come along with me." I went, "Oh, brilliant! Thanks a lot, Evo. That was great." And I saw Ron Saunders, and he looked at me, and I think he thought, "Well, he did a sort of thing." And I went over and I said, "Oh, Mr. Saunders, I was a football manager by then." I said, "Oh, Mr. Saunders, it's lovely to see you. I really just want to apologise all these years on." He just looked at me, turned away and walked away from me. I think he was still playing out his part. There was no way. I have to say, I feel in my heart because the lads have told me, "No, look, he was well pleased and everything, and he was, but he just didn't want me to. He didn't want to do it for whatever reason. Even when he was older, he just wasn't going to let me off the hook, sort of thing. It was a classic meeting." So but he played his part all the way through it, without a doubt.
Absolutely, and you played in 2 League Cup finals at the Villa, Brian. Successful League Cup finals. One went on for a long time, didn't it, in '77? But the '75 one, 1-0 win. Ray Graydon penalty. Kevin Keelan, a former goalkeeper at Aston Villa, got fingers to the post, come back out, and Graydon bagged the winner. I've listened to your previous podcast. You believe that game really focused the eyes of attention for your international career to kick off that Norwich game.
Yeah, I think that and the Youth Cup before that Youth Cup had helped me in the England youth. Mm-hmm. That particular game, I felt I played well. I mean, I could say I come off pitches thinking I wish I had the ball, or I'd been battered by a big centre half for 90 minutes. But I came off the final believing I'd played really well, and I was really happy with that, and the fact that we'd won. And I think I was one of those players who was honest enough with myself to say I played well some games, but if I hadn't played well, I'd be criticising myself more than anything else, really, or more than anybody realised. I think more than anything else. But yeah, I genuinely felt I'd played well. I had a couple of lads really trying to stop me. Dave Stringer, who was a real good experienced player. Tony Powell was the other player. Between those two, they were trying to make sure I had a hard time of it. And but I think I worked the channels well. I got into good positions. And I genuinely felt for a final, I thought I was involved in the game a lot, and I think that gave me an opportunity to get into the England squad at the end of the season. It was, and plus the fact that, that season we got promoted to the back up to the first division in those days. So I think that game highlighted and showcased, what I was about at that time, really.
And certainly reacquainted you with Birmingham City, and as a 21-year-old, scored the winner in a Villa Blues derby, didn't you, at Villa Park? In fact, that was Andy's first introduction, as he was sitting in the dugout watching you took that ball away that you took off Kenny.
Yeah, I think I didn't really take it off him. I think he lost it under his legs. He sort of slipped a bit, and just nipped in, and again, just side-footed it into the corner, So, yeah, a little flick on from, I think Frank Carrer's got a little flick on, and Kenny was about 2 or 3 yards ahead of me, and I had to slide the ball out of the danger zone. And of course, it slid under his feet, and I just nipped in and put it in. So, yeah, I've had the pleasure of scoring in a Blues derby game, but I've also had the other side of it, being beaten a few times.
And you've also assisted in a Blues Villa game, and that one was at St Andrews. Rolled out to Dennis. Dennis gave a nice little ball to you, out your feet, flipped it. Oh, that was the perfect counter-attack goal, in my opinion. It was bang, 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 and Andy, again, a typical Andy Gray, left-footed shot. It was a little bit like Kenny Dalglish in '78 against Bruges in the final, but Yeah,
I think the amount of times the minute Jimmy Grimmer caught a ball, Dennis Mortimer was incredible at just turning and spinning into an area where Jimmy could throw the ball to him. And Dennis started so many counter-attacks off for us, it was untrue, because he could either pass the ball, or B, he could genuinely run with the ball. He was a unique in that era. I mean, I think there's been an era lately where midfield players don't run with the ball very often now. It's about passing. Dennis Mortimer was one of those midfield players who could run with the ball, and he ran with. He looked, there's a lot of modern players that like it, but Dennis looked quicker with the ball than he did without it, and it was because of his run that Jimmy coming to look across. Dennis Mortimer had this uncanny knack of spinning around the outside of whoever was marking him. The ball was thrown into space, and he started counter-attack after counter-attack after counter-attack. I mean, he was a superb player, Dennis Mortimer. I say he's one of the most unlucky players around that era to have not got England caps. I still, to this day, we had a good team, and he was a good captain, and he was a heck of a good player. And, but again, England in those days, basically, you didn't have friendly matches throughout the season. There wasn't international get-togethers. So once a team was picked, it sort of stayed picked type of thing, So it was very difficult for him to break in. But Mortimer was a top player who should have played for England, but unfortunately didn't get many chances,
It's quite incredible because when you look at Dennis's career, and I think if you're looking back in time as well, probably it's got to be in the top three of players that should have been capped by England. I'll put Howard Kendall in that, and also Jimmy Greenough. But Dennis Mortimer, what a player Dennis Mortimer was.
I think a lot of people don't understand that in the present game now, that England international teams have friendly matches, friendly get-togethers, training get-togethers. Yeah. There was none of that in those days. Basically there was an international at the end of the season, or be very lucky if there was one through the season. The World Cup was basically about the top 16 clubs in the world, wasn't it? Really,
yes, it was.
So the whole structure about today's football is just a million miles away from how it was. I think. If you were to sit down and look through all the teams in the league at those days, you would say, why didn't he play more games for it? Yeah. What about him? You could pick out, I think lots of players from different clubs who in today's environment would be given a chance by the manager. We've got to get together. I thought we'll call him up for England and we'll play him in this particular friendly game. You got a chance to prove yourself at that stage. It wasn't the case in those days. And, I totally understand it because I was there, and I was there playing in that period. But so from my point of view, once Trevor Francis got into the full England squad and into the team, it was very difficult for me to oust him because, unless he got injured, he was going to play in the few games that England played, as was, all the players in those days. So that's the only thing I can, in defence of whoever was in charge of the English team in those eras. Their defence would be, well, we've got the team. We've only played 2 games this season. I only get them together for 2 games. I've got to play my best team as I see it, sort of thing. So it's just the way the era was, and we just have to accept it. I'm afraid that's why, the caps weren't as spread out to players as they are today.
Absolutely. And Andy coming down from Scotland, the perfect partner for you. And I know from Andy's point of view, you were the perfect partner for him.
Yeah, look, it was great to play with him. He was just an absolute dream. Yeah. After the brush, mad, brave as a blooming lion. I mean, honestly, you could say it in different ways. I don't mean after the brush in terms of, in terms of how brave he was. He would put his head. I said it on so many occasions and so many dinners, so many get-togethers with fans. Basically, I put the ball in front of him and I knew either his head or his feet were going in there, and there's lots of things that certainly I wouldn't have dived into some of the areas he dived into. It was brilliant. And he was so infectious, and he was like the first person at Aston Villa who really ran around celebrating goals and let everybody know he'd scored. we used to think, what's he doing? Just run back to the halfway line, for God's sake. You know what I mean? We did that back. I mean, players, some people who see little bits of me now go, why didn't you celebrate when you scored a goal? I said, well, it just wasn't the thing in those days. You know what I mean? It was like shake each other's hand, get back to the halfway line and go again sort of thing. I think if Andy played in the modern game, he'd probably be one of the most, you know, his celebrations would be outrageous, I think. I think he'd be doing all sorts. But he was just great. He's wonderful for the dressing room. He was wonderful in bad days, because in bad days he'd stand up and he wasn't frightened to say what he had to say. He was a tremendous motivator on the pitch, off the pitch. I loved him to bits, and you know, he was an absolute. I mean, I had a great relationship with Keith Leonard before him, and he got injured, unfortunately. But Andy he was just brilliant. I mean, he wasn't the biggest player in the world, but he could jump over the top of people. He used to hang on his shoulders. He used to really get up early and hang there. And it was an art form of heading the ball, which was around in those days. You don't see it today. You know, today if you jump earlier on top of somebody, generally it's a foul. But in those days, you know, the game was that it was appreciated that you got up early and hung there. And how he got to the size of him was just unbelievable. He was a special player, a special talent, and it was a massive shame when he got really badly injured. He carried on because he was brave as a lion. I don't think too many people could have carried on what he did, you know, with his injury, and then went off to Wolves and other clubs and still played on. So, yeah, he was a tough lad as well. He had a bit of everything about him, without a doubt.
One of the greatest strikers, central strikers in the country in the 70s. I think him and Supermac were up there in a league of their own as the archetypal number 9, and both in that 76-77 season ended with 29 goals. You bagged 26, and Dixie scored a few as well. And then, of course, you got to the final against Everton, and Andy didn't play in that.
No. I mean, for a forward line to score over 70 goals between them, I mean, it's like, it's unheard of today, I guess. But that's how we were. That team was again, it was we talked about Ron Saunders before. I'm sorry to go back to it, but for that team to be broken up and for it to be put together again and mended, and arguably go on to achieve more, which it did do, achieve more. Whether you could argue. And I think even today, some people who saw the 77 team would say, but it was great watching them. But he just evolved his teams. I mean, for him to break that team up and to rebuild and then win the league, it's an incredible achievement by Saunders. Yeah, the 77 was just great fun. We were really entertaining. Andy, myself, John Dean, who came into it, was probably not given as much credit as he should have had, Dixie. But he was a young lad who worked hard, who got his share of goals, who helped set things up. So young Dixie was a good lad. Andy and myself sort of took the headlines from him, but I genuinely say he was very much part of a three-pronged attack. We had those two lads who played more central. I was given a pretty much free role to do really what I wanted. I played alongside Andy as such, but when Dixie came in, I often was given a total freedom role to go where I wanted, to do what I wanted. So within my period of playing with strikers, I played 2 with Keith Leonard. That basically was a two-pronged attack. Andy Gray, a two-pronged attack. But when Dixie was in there, it was a slight variation on that. I was given the Tony Morley, Ray Graydon type of role. Yeah. And they scored. I mean, Ray Graydon scored 30 goals one season from a wide position, didn't he? And that was something that was given to me. So there were slight variations on Saunders' teams, but the same principles were there all the time. But 77 was a great period for the team and the club. It was massively entertaining.
Before we go on to the 77 League Cup final, you also partnered briefly with Andy Lockhead, didn't you, in the early days?
I did. I loved Andy. Andy was a man. I was a little boy. And I knew I was a little boy when I stood next to him because he didn't try and make me feel like a little boy. It's just the way he sort of spoke to me. Yeah. Oi, son, come on. Wherever I am, you get within 10 yards of me and be on the move. Pick up all the pieces. He became. I remember playing against Oldham when he was assistant manager, I think, and we beat them, and I'd scored a hat-trick, and he'd done a piece in the paper the night before saying that he really, was really, really pleased for me and thought the world of me. Because I never got that sort of conversation with him. He was always, I almost called him Mr. Lockhead more often than not. I mean, he was just that sort of a man, and nobody argued with Andy. I mean, he was a tough nut, my word. But there was those days it was centre half versus centre forward. That was probably the main difference between winning and losing. If the centre half won the battle, that team would genuinely win. If the centre forward won the battle, that team would win. Yeah. And those respective people on each team knew how important their role was, because most teams were talked about in those days was, when you get a chance to hit your centre forward, hit them with the ball, and that starts the attacks off. So Andy was very pivotal in the team. He was very much the target man. And he always used to say to me, if you're 10 yards away from me when the ball comes to me, you're in the wrong position. You need to be close to me because, I'm either going to flick it on or he's not going to get a clear header. Let me tell you, the centre-half's not going to have a clear header. Or me and him are going to be scrapping with each other and the ball will drop in between us. He said, but I'm not going to let a free ball go ever. So you need to be on the move round me. And that's how the game was in those days. But he was just a real man in a man's game. Centre halves and centre forwards were big, rough, tough guys in those days, and you had to live with them, and you'd got to love them because they were massively important for each team in those days.
I was watching the Bournemouth game on YouTube today. Both Jeff Bowden and Andy Lockhead scored in that game. A brilliant diving header from Ted McDougall, I've got to say.
Yes.
One of the greatest diving headers I've ever seen, apart from, of course, Andy. But how instrumental was Jeff? Because you pretty much took Jeff's number 8 shirt, didn't you? Jeff was leaving. You was the new kid on the block coming in to take that shirt.
Jeff Bowden was probably one of the I would say, and I don't talk about Jeff very often, but Jeff was probably one of the best professionals I've ever come across. He's a perfect gentleman. Played the game properly, never anything overly flashy, but always there, always in the right team at the same place at the right time. He was just a general all-round good guy, and someone who I respect an awful lot. He was one of those good pros, the real top-notch. Him, Bruce Rioch and others were right up there. And he was, just so underrated. He was quality. And he oozed sort of style when he played, even on the pitches when they were bobbly and there was sand all over the place and everything. Everything he did was like just in sort of perfect precision. He was just really neat and tidy. I liked it. A lot of time for Jeff Bowden. He was one of the real sort, and he helped that club through that period, third division, and coming back to rebuild. He did a great job for the club, and there was a lot of people in those eras played for Birmingham and then Villa, then Birmingham, Wolves, and then Villa, and it was the way it was in those days, and it wasn't as frowned upon, and it wasn't made as difficult by people. He's just come from Birmingham. Yeah, well, he lives here, doesn't he? So it's best that he comes close. That was the mentality in those days. But at the same time, they still had to prove it to the Villa fans or the Birmingham fans, gone from whichever way they'd moved from. The fans still needed to be proven by. He needed to prove to the fans that he was worthy of moving from Birmingham to Villa or Villa to Birmingham, whoever the respective player was. There was still that stigma, but it certainly wasn't as it is today. But Bowden was he was a top professional footballer in that period where there was a lot of lads who, lived life to the full, and football was a job to them. But it was still, it wasn't as professional as people like Jeff Bowden made it be. Bruce Rioch, Ray Gray. I keep going back to these names, but because there was George Curtis was unbelievable as a professional footballer. and stood in that dressing room in front of people and pointed at them and told them what they were. And in a period where we were about to be relegated out to the third division, he stood there and told everybody what they should do, and he was very instrumental in rebuilding that club. So there were good players there as well, and I was just pleased to see all that. Absolutely pleased to see that, because that stood me in good stead in the mid-70s. When it would have been easy to go out with the lads all the time, which is something I didn't do. I kept myself very much to myself, really.
Apart from Giddy.
Apart from Gidman, yeah. I
you had to pull him out of a few times, didn't you?
Well, I never went out in a gang of players. I mean, that was the thing I hated more than anything else. I thoroughly enjoyed John's company, and that didn't mean I was not a friend of the lads, but they would know not to bother asking me if they were going out as a group, because I just went, no, it's just not for me. You'll just end up doing something silly. I'd seen it as a kid, and I didn't want to go down that road, So Gidman, but John and I had, we used to go out on our own and have fun. But because we were on our own, it was more professionally done. Not professionally, but it was done on a lower profile. Yeah. We enjoyed being out with each other. We had a great laugh, but we weren't sort of, in a massive group causing problems or anything like that. So that Giddy, I just love Gidman. I can't help it. I mean, he's quite grumpy these days. In all fairness, I have to say, but he was a wonderful man. He's so funny. I loved John. He was a crazy, crazy lad. We had some good laughs, without a doubt.
Again, another player that should have played a hell of a lot more for England.
Yeah. Well, he moved to Man United and then Everton. Wasn't it? Or was it Everton, Man United? I can't remember which it was. But he was a quality player. I think generally probably one of the best right backs I've seen in the 50 years, without a doubt. Again, in an era where fullbacks were very much defensive minded, you couldn't stop him going forward. He loved it, and he could run all day long. John was real quality. Very nervous. People don't realise how nervous he was. He was very conscious of if he played well, or very conscious of if he was playing up against a good winger. You could see he was nervous before the game. But off the pitch, he was, Jack the lad. Everybody loved him. He was great fun, good company, and he and I had a real good friendship together. Yeah.
What players gave you the most hardest of times during your career, Browne?
In terms of centre halves that what play against and things like that.
Yeah. Who would you think? Oh, God, I have an early night tonight. I'm up against so and so tonight.
Well, I remember I spoke with. It's only a few years back now when we were probably in the Championship. I was speaking with Roy McFarland in the hospitality room, and Roy was supposedly the new breed of centre half. We were moving away from the big, tough, rough lads to somebody who was mobile and could run around, and it was a new breed. And Roy was classed as this is the new way we're going to play, because this fella can run and he's tall and he's slim. Someone asked him the question. He said, "Oh, Roy, how many times did you play against him?" He said, "I played against him a few times." And the fella then said to him, "Did he score against you?" He said, "He only scored against me the first time I played against him." He said, "He scored 2 goals in the first half." He said, "Well, what did you do different to make it hard for him the next few games?" He said, "I kicked lumps out of him." So he wasn't especially as refined as people thought he was, But he said, "Yeah, I just kicked lumps out of him." And this was like the new breed of centre forward, centre half. So he had a bit of everything about what I'm trying to say is, he could play. He was more mobile. That's why people like me got kicked so much, because they were big lads, the centre halves. They were generally well built, big, strong. That's why I say you look at modern day centre half, and they're nothing like the old fashioned 60s and 70s centre halves. And being physical was very much part of it. So Roy was I didn't especially remember him as being one of my toughest characters, but that was his answer to that particular question. But I remember playing against quite a few lads. Larry Lloyd frightened me once. Larry Lloyd told me what he was going to do to me. I foolishly tackled Larry Lloyd, and that wasn't the sort of thing you should do. And I actually really caught him, and I really hurt him. But he didn't say anything. He just went, ow. He didn't make much noise, I could see him sort of grunt. But he wouldn't let on that he was hurt. But within a minute, once he got back up on the floor, he just looked at me and told me what he was going to do to me.
Yeah.
So I kept out his way most of the time. I tried to keep right out of his way. But yeah, there were some tough characters. And you always knew you were going to have a hard game against them. But yeah, and unfortunately in that era, they could kick you a couple of times before they'd even be spoken to by the referee. So again, it made it. I think the modern game has made forward players, think far more comfortably about what going in tackles or being caught from behind. It just doesn't happen as much now, which is a really good thing for the game, to be honest.
Yeah, it is, because every team, you're right, had a hard man. They had a hatchet man, and they took no prisoners. In fact, the defensive partnership, it was both of them giving you, and they were taking turns, weren't they? So the referee then had done the third one, probably book them, but you probably had 4 or 5 before that.
Yeah, and there was generally somebody who played in the middle of the park who was quite handy as well. He generally had I had a young brother who was one of them. My brother Alan was definitely in that category. He only played 3 or 4 games for the Villa, but went off, and every club he played for, if I speak to people who were at that club or players who I've met over the years, and they say, oh, your brother, oh my word, he was the toughest lad I've ever known, sort of thing. So, he made a name for himself as a holding midfield player. But there was always like that type of person around as well in the game. So, but a holding midfield player in those days compared to holding midfield players today, the holding midfield player today generally is a passer, breaks the play up a little bit and passes the ball around. So there is still the same principle. In fact, I think we're going full circle almost in football. When I first started football, it was the old, right back, left back, centre back, 2 left half, right half, inside. We talk about inside number 8 players and number 10 players like we did back in the 50s, even before I played football. As a young schoolboy, we seem to be going back more and more to that type of. Those sentences come around. He's an inside left. He's a number 10. He's an inside right. He's an attacking sort of number 8. And I talk about those sort of things to people as well. There is a lot about the modern game. Obviously changed, but still has it's very prevalent and relevant to the 50s. Yeah. About, talk about inside forwards and number 10s and number 8s and number 4s and holding midfield player. So there's always things that you can look back on that actually come back into fashion. And right now, I think there's certainly 2 or 3 positions which they talk about, which were very similar to players who played in the 50s, which is before my time. But I see the similarity in when they talk about number 10s and they talk about number 8s, being how important to the team. Well, those players were massively important to football. When I was a schoolboy, really. You had a good inside left and a good inside right. You were one hell of a team.
Yeah.
And I see similarities today. They talk about the 8s and the 10s. So there's still a little bit of goodness coming out of the older football, isn't there, really?
I think that the modern game has learned from the games and the players of the past, because if you have no past, you have no history, you've got no present, and you've got no future. So you always have to look back with fondness and remember those fantastic players that played before you, who were your heroes and your inspirations. Who was your inspiration and heroes, Browne, growing up?
Well, I was a massive fan of George Best, I have to say. I remember being at Lillishall on a coaching. I was a young player, but we used to do the donkey work for the coaches. Like we were told to be at Lillishall, and all the coaches had coaching sessions with us. And I remember, I remember one day someone said to me in the queue for dinner, "Who's your?" I said, "Oh, George Best." And I was starting to grow my hair then. And Dave Sexton was behind me, and he said, "You've got a long way to go yet, son." But so he was sort of clipping me around the ears in many respects. Not really, but I mean, just said, "Oh, you got a long way to go, son." He obviously wasn't too far wrong, in all fairness. But best was generally here. But I tried to learn from players who I played against. I remember Dennis Stewart teaching me an awful lot in a game. Played for Man City. I remember playing at Man City and they absolutely battered us 3-0 at Main Road. Yeah. And Stewart was incredible. And I played in one of those games where we never got the ball forward. We couldn't get the ball off them. They on that day were fantastic. And I remember basically standing there watching Dennis Stewart play, thinking, "Wow, look at him!" And I couldn't get into the game, And you come off. There was games like that as a forward. You're thinking, "I haven't had a kick today," but Stewart did. And 2 weeks later, we played him in the League Cup, as it was in those days, at Villa Park, and we beat them. I think it was 3-0 because I'm sure I scored 2 goals that day. And I'd learned so much, and I was so determined to try and show Dennis Stewart that I could do what he did. So even while you're playing a game, you can look at somebody and learn something, and just his little movements and his little spins and his little flicks inspired me to be better in a game that was 2 weeks on from being beaten by them. And we went on to win the League Cup that year, and we beat Man City. I think it was 3-0. And we'd been beaten at their place, battered only a week or so later, 10 days, maybe it's 2 weeks at the most. So even watching a player playing against them can inspire you. Playing on the same pitch as Cruyff one day was inspirational. Watching Pelé play at Villa Park was inspirational. But I liked a lot of players. There's so many people who, if you look at the players, Rodney Marsh, them type of players. They were different, and they were allowed to be different, and they were allowed to stand there, waving your arm around, saying, "What are you doing? Give it to me. I'll show you what to do." There was a bunch of them, There was the lad at Queen's Park Rangers. Oh my word! Come on, name. Stan Bowles. Stan, of course. Stan. There was people like that, in positions all up and down the country. It was as the era had it, so they were iconic for that particular era. So playing against those sort of people, even if you had the worst game of the two, in my case, I used to watch the other person play and think, yes, okay, got that. Yeah, I've seen that run. Yeah, I've seen that. So you were even teaching yourself while you were playing, and you often taught yourself an awful lot when the opposition had given you a hard time, because let's face it, couldn't go back and watch the game over. We couldn't learn football from sitting in an office with a coach or somebody saying, "Oh, look at this movement he did. Oh, look at that one. Look at the." It just wasn't available. We weren't on television. You were lucky to get on television once a year for the FA Cup final. So we couldn't watch the games. If you were lucky enough to get 5 minutes on the big match or the Sunday afternoon thing, you were thinking, "Great, I've not been on." I've only been on for one kick, but you played the whole game. But you couldn't learn anything from those particular short videos of what the game was about. So it was all self-taught or taught by coaches by talking to you. So you had to learn in a different way. It must be fantastic for these youngsters today to be able to sit down with somebody who's analysed their game and showing them things what to do. Now, the most important thing is what you're showing, you've got to learn for and then be able to produce it as well. And that's often the hardest thing. You know what to do, but can you produce it? I think from my point of view, in my era, the honest thing to say was I used to watch the other player, certain types of player, when we played against them, not when they were on telly, because you never saw them get a kick on telly hardly. You'd see the odd bit of brilliance, but you had to watch them while you were playing in the same game as them to learn from them sort of players. And that was a massive part of my learning curve. Not just learning from the coaches, learning from watching players who I was playing against on the day.
I was trying to find on YouTube the goal that you scored at Bristol City, but sadly...
Oh, no, it's not on. I've never seen that.
None either. But what an iconic picture, Brian, that is. How the hell did you get up so high to volley that ball?
But when I was a young kid, I used to play an awful lot of basketball. I was actually quite a good basketball player. And basketball teaches you that when you're doing a run and jump at the net or the ball or the backboard, it teaches you to go this 1-2 strides.
Yep.
And I just think that I had that sort of, if you get that sort of timing into a jump, and on that particular day and on that particular picture, Terry Weir put me on one of those 1-2 jumping air. And it's amazing how high you get if you get that synchro into it. If the synchronization into it is right, you get an awful lot higher than a standing jump or a backward jump or just one-footed jump. And I think on that particular occasion, he caught me in a stride where I'd got the 1-2 and right up in the air, got the momentum to take myself in the air. And of course, he took the picture of it as well, which was, and I still love it to this day. It was at Bristol City pre-season. And I was talking to, there was a few people in the boardroom and things like that. And one of the lads was saying to me, they said, did you ever score here? And I went, I'll tell you what, I'll show you a picture. So I was happily boasting in the boardroom that day, I said, yeah, I'll show you a picture. I said, yeah, this was scored here. So I've had an opportunity to show that off this year, which was really sort of enjoyable. So yeah, it was a great goal, and Terry caught it absolutely perfectly, which was great for me, really.
Were you talking about basketball? Paul Fletcher, the Burnley centre forward of the 70s, he was very good at basketball when he was a kid.
Yes.
And he was telling me how he used his basketball skills to elevate him to get up and win those headers. Yeah.
Well, you see, people often run, stop, and double jump with their 2 feet. That's sometimes the case. But if you get that momentum and that what you need to do to play basketball, to jump as high as you can.
Yeah.
If you get that into your stride. And it's readily available for everybody, and I'm sure other people do it without even thinking about it. But it was something that I'd been taught through basketball. And as you say, I remember Fletcher. He could jump, couldn't he? My word, he was. I remember as a kid going to Burnley and watching him play. So it was. He could do that. But that's how I got up there on that one particular day. That's for sure.
I went on Twitter the other day, a couple of months back probably now. Calvert-Lewin, I think he's brilliant in the air. And I just put a tweet out to him, did you ever play basketball, son? I mean, it never got back to me. But it is a skill to be able to get up there and for central strikers. And for the kids learning the trade, go and play basketball for a bit. You might get an extra spring in your jump. Your fantastic League Cup exploits against Queen's Park Rangers. You broke the hearts of the Loftus Road faithful at Highbury when you scored a hat-trick. And Dennis made every one of them, didn't he?
Yeah, Mortimer, he was immense. I mean, he was at the heartbeat of everything on that particular team. I'm trying. The 3 goals were. He was very just instrumental in a lot of games, and Dennis was, as I said, he powered his way, and he actually got stronger as the game goes on. I mean, that was so his fitness levels were incredibly good. But yeah, Dennis played a big part that particular game. Never quite got the credit that he deserved for it. And obviously that was one of my finest nights to score a trick in the semi-final to go to Wembley was fantastic for me, yeah.
And then, of course, in the final, then the trilogy that ended at Old Trafford wasn't the first time that you scored a wonderful goal at Old Trafford, because you did score against them in the FA Cup, didn't you? For Aston Villa.
Yeah, I think it sort of floated in. I could never have powered it in. I've seen it a few times. For me, I mean, I didn't score many goals from outside the box. Yeah. So, I mean that at Old Trafford, I think Stepney was in goal. Alex Stepney, I think, on the day. But yeah, that was good. And then the 2 goals in the final. It was pure fatigue on behalf of everybody apart from Dennis. But we were a fairly fit side in those days. We were renowned for our fitness, as I've said, because of Saunders. Excuse me. So everybody was that tired on the last goal. I just got a chance to side put it in. It was a great night. winning cup final, playing that season 3 cup finals was quite interesting. I mean, the Wembley game was poor. The Hillsborough game was quite a decent game, in all fairness. And the one at Man United where it had to be resolved, I think, looked as if it was going to go into a penalties. I'm sure I've read up a little bit since. I've never been sure whether it was going to go to penalties or not, but I think I read the other week that it was deemed to go to penalties, which would have been a first. But obviously, I snuck in the last minute to get the winner, which the commentator Julie said, well, that's it, they've won the cup now, sort of thing, which is a nice thing to hear.
How did it feel when you scored that goal so late? Because ultimately, it was a ding-dong game, and when you scored in those dying minutes, the team are dead on the feet, aren't they? So that really killed them. How did you feel when you scored that? I bet you could have run back to Birmingham.
Yeah, I think it does, doesn't it? You get, it's amazing what a goal does to any individual. I mean, I can relate to watching Matty Cash at the weekend.
What a goal! Yeah.
He scored a great goal and nobody could catch him. It was brilliant. I mean, and he's such a lovely lad, which is fantastic. I actually met his dad just before the game as well, which was great as well. So that was. But yeah, you can even see it in today's football, scoring a goal and how much it does for you. It's brilliant. So. I mean, I obviously didn't sprint anywhere, and I didn't celebrate too much. I just ran over to Smudger, I think it was, and other people come over and patted each other on the back, and then we jogged back to the halfway line. We didn't even walk, do we not? You know what I mean? That's the thing that makes me laugh. We didn't walk back slowly to the halfway line. We jogged back. It's like, yeah, come on, let's get on with it, sort of thing. Whereas, today you would slow down, lads. Just rub the pain into them. You just make sure you're rubbing it in. So there's all of that which evolved, hasn't it? Really,
Yeah.
We didn't do those sort of things. All right, we scored. Let's jog back to the halfway line and start again. There's 30 seconds to go. We're almost giving them a chance to equalise, aren't we? Really?
Yeah.
We could have waited a minute to get back to the halfway line, but you just didn't do it. So those are the things that stick in my mind more than anything else. Almost the naivety of it in many ways. We just got on with things. We just did things. Whereas, lots of things have evolved in the modern game, which are great. It's apt. It's the right thing to do. And I'm sure as a manager, I'd said to players quite a few times afterwards, when you've scored, just settle down, take your time, compose yourselves, make sure when you get back to positions, you're ready to play again. Don't just jog back there, turn around and ready to go, and you're not set. And I think that's why there were probably so many goals within a minute in the olden days. Someone else would score straight away because you didn't really rub it in. You didn't really think about it. You just started off again playing again. And it was always said, wasn't it, back in the olden days that you're at your most vulnerable the minute you've scored a goal. Yeah. It was a common saying in those days. So we've all learned from those sort of things as well. So it's great what the game has taught people as you go along.
Well, my team, Birmingham, were at the most vulnerable at any minute in the 90s.
No. Well, you could say that. I definitely couldn't say that.
No, you're too kind. What was the highest high that you received at Villa as a player? And also the lowest low must have been the fact that you had to retire at the age of just 27. And for the young kids listening to this podcast, Jack Grealish is 26 now. Next year he retires. That was your scenario. Yeah. So sad.
Yeah, I don't know, and as you said that, it makes me think when you mentioned myself. I mean, I'd played 304 games by the time I was 27. I'm not sure how many they play today. I don't know at that age. So, and I missed games with injuries because I damaged my knee a couple of times. I've never really compared it like that, but my lowest obviously would be, I think first, not so much the one that I knew I was pretty much finished with, but when I remember hurting my knee the first season after playing for England. I damaged my knee at Everton, and it took me quite some time. I mean, they put me in plaster for 6 weeks, and I only had a cartilage operation. Yeah. So that injury, which was the start of me having knee problems, is a day I'll never forget. And to be honest, it actually hurt me more. I remember the pain that first time was greater than the team. When I heard it against Wolves, I had to come off. And I knew there was something really, really wrong, but it just felt loose, my knee. Whereas when I heard it against Everton, God, it hurt me. I was in absolute agony. So that's the most painful, and because it was painful, it sticks in my mind more than anything else. The best moments, it's difficult. I mean, I get mixed up now because I've had so many great moments with management in other places. So to talk about my greatest moment at Villa as a player, it's a difficult one. I guess the first thing that's coming to mind is the fact that I scored the hat-trick in the semi-final. That's a great achievement. That's a wonderful thing for me. But I don't think it was my finest game sort of thing. But achievement sort of comes out as a different meaning to me. Because I can genuinely think, when you talk to me about the League Cup final first time round, I think I played better in that game, but I didn't score, but we won the League Cup. Yeah. But years later, I've scored a hat-trick in the semi-final, and it's more of an achievement. But I don't think I played as well in that particular game. I find it very difficult to say what my finest moment was as a player. Lots of memories, but they were scarred by being finished. It's not an easy thing to take. Somehow I recovered and got on with it. So and then if you said to me my favourite achievement in football would be winning the League Cup with Villa as a manager, because I never ever dreamt that I would ever do that. So to have done that, I just think that was the best ever sort of thing, because I don't think anybody would have. And certainly people who played with me would never have thought I'd have done that. So that for me, to have done something that people didn't think I could do, sticks out like a sore thumb.
What was obviously you were a player, you were playing as a manager, you were a manager, but it must have been a very, very close second to win the League Cup as a manager. How did that make you feel compared to when you were a player as a young un winning the League Cup?
Oh, my first League Cup, I can still remember going to bed and dreaming. And I couldn't go to sleep because I was just dreaming about playing in the final. And I was dreaming about what I was going to do. And I was dreaming about who I was playing against. And I was thinking about what I could do to make me better on that day. So the first one was always the one that was, I wouldn't say I was nervous. I genuinely wasn't nervous, but I thought more about football than people thought I did. Yeah. Because I had long hair and looked a little bit scraggy when I played. A lot of people had often said to me, well, you must have been so carefree. It was untrue. Well, I was, but I still genuinely, like I said when I watched Dennis Stewart, when I was watching him, people wouldn't think that me standing on the pitch with long hair would be watching Dennis Stewart because he's playing well and I'm not. They wouldn't think, oh, look at him, he's not bothered. Because looks can be deceptive. Yeah. So I there's a lot of things about me which of people who knew me as a manager, who were of a certain age, wouldn't relate me as a manager to me as a player. They would say, oh yeah, looks after himself, look tidy, which I always try and do now. I was quite scruffy as a player, but that's the way I was. I like my long hair. I like to have the biggest, baggiest hipsters and flares than anybody else. So I've built a couple of characters in myself, which I'm quite proud of. I don't know quite which one I am, to be honest. But I'm a bit of a showman, I think. I don't mind a crowd. I don't mind, a football crowd. Outside of football, I just disappear into the background. It brings the worst and the best out of me, I think, in many respects. But I think anybody who knew me as a player probably wouldn't associate me as a manager. People who knew me as a manager would never associate me as the sort of player I was. And I get it now when I go to football matches and the parents will be saying to the little one, "Oh, I saw Brian play. You should have seen him play." And he goes, and then the kid will say, "Well, but he was the manager, wasn't he?" And then he's got a little recollection of me as a manager, sort of thing, only because he's been told about it, but no recollection whatsoever about me as being a player. So it's sort of changed to have. It's amazing to have changed my personality, or it seems as if I've changed my personality within my lifestyle and lifetime. I see it as going. I see football as me going on stage.
Yeah.
And that. So I'm not sure that it's the real me, to be honest. You know, I mean, I'm here at home and I'm just dad. You know, I'm just like everybody else. You know, and I'm the son of a miner, and I'm proud of being the son of a miner, and I'm proud of my mum and my dad who passed away. You know, I think of them nearly every time I talk about them. You know, so I'm proud of my upbringing, but I think football to me is a stage. When I go out of this house and I'm going to a match now, I'm going to work and I have to do what I know I have to do. Which, you know, some people go, "Oh, get us a couple of tickets, right? Can I come and sit with you?" I'm going, "No, I'm going to work." So I've just that's it for me. The football is the stage where I, you know, whatever gear I've got on, I'm that person. I am that part of me. The long hair, the show-offy footballer, the polite, correct, organised manager. And I'd like to think now, you know, in terms of anything ambassadorial, I'm not going to let the club down. Anything that's advisory, I'm not going to say anything I shouldn't say. I'm going to say what I think because it's the right thing to say what you think. So football, all of football to me is the stage, and when I go on that stage, I'm working, and I adapt to whatever my particular role is at that time.
And it's been a wonderful stage for you, hasn't it? It's been a wonderful place of work, Villa Park. I do remember there was a time at the end of your career when there wasn't a possibility you signed for Birmingham City. And I do remember talking to you before and you saying, well, I'm glad that I didn't because, you know, Villa fans might have looked at me differently had I gone and played for Birmingham. But Ron Saunders crossed the city. Yeah. And
people have.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think when the bigger star players and the bigger star managers do, it's a bigger shockwave, isn't it? But Ron Saunders to this day is still revered at Villa Park as the greatest manager. Whether he managed Birmingham City or not is irrelevant. And I think it would have been the same. A lot of people
won't know that.
No,
a lot of younger people won't know that. You know, I see people say to me sometimes, "Oh, you nearly went to Birmingham." I say, "Yeah." Dennis Mortimer played for Birmingham City.
Yeah, he didn't.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. I said, Des Bremner did.
Yeah.
I said, Tony Morley played a few games. So, you know, there is that era was all about, well, where do you live? I live in the Midlands, so you play for the Midlands clubs. You don't go that far. Yeah. As I've said, I mean, the modern game is completely different. We know society today has changed. It's a completely different world to what it was. I mean, because, you know, I know that because of, you know, being brought up in the 50s and you know, school with short son and being the last person to have his long trousers at school and all that sort of thing, because I just remember all those things as a kid. You know, I come from a very, very a background of being around the mines and the pits with my dad and going to you know, he used to play in the local band and I used to go marching with him and things like that. It's a completely different world I live in now. You know that you just got your respect for all that, and you know then that, you know, if the shop over the road offered you a job and it was a little bit more money, you'd go and do work in the other shop sort of thing because you had to. You couldn't say no to it.
Absolutely.
And football in those days was the same. Yeah. You know, I don't know any footballer from my era who would have retired on what they earned in football.
No chance. No.
They had to do well in other stuff, and there are lots of them who are doing well. So, you know, you're still a worker. You're still not grounded. And I'm not saying modern footballers aren't grounded because, you know, some of them there's some great lads around, and there always will be. But it's, you know, we're very, you know, as I said, the part of our week was having a drink of beer in the pub with the fans and everything, you know, and being just part of the community. Whereas it's very difficult for them to be that these days, you know, because they're not really allowed to do it. And it would be more frowned upon if someone was seen having a pint in the pub with everybody every night of the week, sort of thing, you know. So I'm pleased to have witnessed all of these eras, you know, 50 years of football. and being in football and being around a club like Aston Villa that I have been, it's been just a wonderful period for me. And I think I'm going to probably, hope I don't get the start wrong, but in the entire history of Aston Villa, there are only 6 of the club's managers that I've never met in my life. In the entire history of Aston Villa, there are only 6 managers that I've never met in my life.
Wow.
And that's an incredible stat. And you can check that out for me, because I know Eric Houghton in the early 50s, I have met or been in the room with or talked to or know very well every one of the managers. Yeah. But what you have to think of is the first manager of Aston Villa was manager for 40 years. and that's how life was in those days.
Yeah, it was.
But I genuinely have met, talked to or know all but 6 of Aston Villa's managers in the club's entire history. So that's like, and I look at that and I say that, when I say that to myself, I go, wow, blooming heck. So that's why I love the place, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
It's just in me now, very much in me. And whatever happens tomorrow or the day after that, I have what I have and I'll never lose what I've had. It's great. It's brilliant.
I don't think that Aston Villa could have a better ambassador. I don't think there's anybody else that could be called Mr. Aston Villa. And you rightly are that person. Your wonderful book, My Aston Villa, is out now. I'm waiting for my postman to bring a signed copy and chuck it through my letterbox. But anybody that hasn't ordered it yet can still order it from all the W's, officialbrianlittle.com. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, I believe it's right in front of you. I'm not very good at remembering things like that, but so I can't promote myself on that particular stage. So I hope you're right.
And are Aston Villa stocking it in the club shop as well, Brian?
No. Right now we are looking after it ourselves.
Yeah.
Pedro and I want to test ourselves. I am officially the postman. I have been stacking books up, posting them, signing them, sending them out to people. I have a lot of help from a friend of mine, my wife's best friend, and my wife herself. So we're a little army here at home. I'm sitting signing and making sure this is going on. The others are postage in them, the address is on, and we've been unbelievably busy the last week. I'm just proud of the book. I like the look of the book. When I look at it, it's blue about it and everything. It just, it's something that when I spoke to Pedro, I keep calling him Pedro, I'm sorry, but when I spoke to him before last Christmas, we just said, look, great idea, but if it's not very good, we'll have to just stop. But it'll give us something to do to start. But once we started, all of these things you talked to me about the 70s especially, so, but it's more than that. It's how each team has done. I'm not being nasty, it's easy, but sometimes, I can explain why I think to some people why something went wrong, and it's easier for me now to look and say, they weren't far off getting it right, but they just made a few. When you look at a Ron Saunders team, and then look at a team, say 2015-16 when the club were relegated, you can actually see why good players didn't gel together. Yeah. Because a lot of the team went on to play quite well all over the world, 2015-16, but it was probably one of the worst seasons the club's ever had. And I try and say to people inside the book, I'll try and explain what I think, didn't work for them in that particular period in the game, and other things and other eras. How I admire Ron Atkinson as well as and Ron and I and myself, Ron and John, which is a very important period in my life. I think we complemented each other. We passed on something to each other and left to work with. But to put my own stamp on it, but John put his own stamp on mine, and Martin and other things like that. So there's lots of things in the book that I think will impress a lot of people. And I hope they enjoy it, because I've certainly enjoyed putting it together. And Pedro's been a real trooper. He's a clever man for me. He knows a lot about me, so he got things out to me which I'd probably hidden away for quite some time, to be honest. So I think they'll enjoy it, especially Villa. I mean, it's going to be Villa fans anyway. So I think they'll enjoy it. I really do.
Well, I am a Birmingham City fan, as you know, Brian, and I will enjoy it because I love talking and reading about great football players, and certainly great football players when I was growing up in the 70s. So can I thank you so much, as always, for your time, and all the very best going forward with the book. When's the next book coming out, and when's our next podcast? And if you and Pedro want to do a podcast,
I've actually got a few surprises. I'll tell you off air what I'm going to do next, but I'm not going to announce. Right. I have to do something. My friend. I can't sit and do nothing, me. That's for sure. So there is another project, but it'll be a little while yet. But I know what I'm going to do.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it already, Brian. I'll text you, and then you can text me back, and I'll have that. Wow. Well, I'll be right by you, mate, helping you all that I can.
All right, brilliant to speak to you again. Take care.
Cheers, Brian. Thank you, and thanks for listening, guys. Bye-bye now.